page so I can find you.
Oh boy.
Okay, want to say something?
Yes. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not working.
It's not on there. Let me click it back to one other one. Sorry,
I'm
guys.
just trying to figure out the sound issue here.
Every time we have my phone, we get the attachment, and then we have Andre's phone. Okay, say something else.
Yeah, see, she's saying Mike's super quiet.
Get the attachment, and then we have Andre's phone. Okay, say something else.
Yeah, see, she's saying Mike's super quiet. It's jumping between the two.
Maybe because I'm right next to it. Okay, let's try this.
Try what?
This we're gonna do. This what we're gonna do.
Croutal soda.
Okay.
I don't think they work there.
It's fine. We're just gonna keep going. And
how does the sound to you guys? Is it echoey? If it's echoey, obviously it's not. The mic's not working. It should be crisp.
Let me see.
No echoes.
The camera's moving because I'm clicking stuff on it. Okay, we're just gonna get started. Next time I'll just hopefully remember my phone.
Well, there's no point in wearing these then.
Just in case we're...
No more echo.
Yeah. Because
I don't know.
I click cancellation. It's okay. Sorry guys, I figured out how to make it work on my phone, but we forgot the attachments. So, I forgot it. So
maybe we should just keep it here in the office.
That's true.
Alrighty, welcome to Kingdom Soldier Armory. We're finally getting started. My name is Andre Galenko. This is Victoria, my wife.
I always pause because his logo's on my face. I need to move over. I like the logo on my face.
No, that's not good.
Okay, we'll just do this. Okay. Anyways, the reason I kind of pause and laugh every time he says, "Hi there, I'm Andre Galenko," because his voicemail used to always be, "Hey, you've reached Andre Galenko with the Evangelical House of Prayer." So every time you say your name, I just want to barge in with Evangelical House of Prayer, and then that doesn't match here or work here. But hello and welcome. We're bringing to you our approach to hard conversations.
Yes.
I'm still kind of in the...
Yeah, you need to move. You need to move over.
Yeah, this is all set up just so... Here, how about we just do
look. This is great, guys. Move that bonsai, that fake, or whatever it is.
I want it to be known that we have
great
video proof of...
That needs to be moved. We'll move the furniture to accommodate the camera.
I know, I was just...
Oh boy. Well, this is a great start to today's podcast.
How about I do this a little bit? Look.
Oh, what do you know?
Because we're so fancy, just turn the camera slowly. Yep, I was going to do that. But we decided to take the hard route.
Yes.
There you go.
Alright. Anyway, this topic was, well, actually it was my idea, but you thought up with the questions. It's a little chilly in here, so I'm wearing a hat. What was I going to say? Wow, I'm so scatterbrained right now.
So he came up with this conversation, sent me the topic, sent it to me, and then Funny thing is, he kind of changed his mind, but I already went full force with the topic, so here we are. Brought to you by Victoria Galenko today, and Andre will be my guinea pig in answering the questions.
As usual. And if this is your first time watching, and a rerun, or maybe if you're joining for the first time, um, be sure to give us a like, subscribe so you can keep up, check out our videos from before, and make sure to comment. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear about it. Anyway, get to the questions.
Okay. Why we're not experts on communication, obviously, or
Obviously. Okay.
we're not experts in the field of communication or having difficult conversations like we talked about in the previous. Actually, this topic makes sense because our last topic was talking about what was the title? Do you remember? We were talking about. Well, I was talking a lot about confrontation and not wanting to do it. Oh, we were talking about being honest. That's what we're talking about.
Oh, yes.
So
Being
we already
honest.
have been kind of on this topic of conversation, so it makes sense that the Lord brought us here today. But anyways, we are not experts on this topic, but
as was said,
we would really like to share our approach, what we have found, because we have been doing this for a while, and as you can imagine, we have had to have a lot of difficult, Andre more so than me, but we've had to have a lot of difficult conversations. And so we really just wanted to share our approach, what has helped us, being that it's specifically to do with the church, with serving, and this is a Kingdom Soldier equipping channel. So if you would like to, well, here, I'll ask you our first question and we'll just dive right in. So if you know you have a difficult conversation coming up, how do you prepare for it? You personally.
Talk to me.
Yes, sir.
Well, number one, obviously, is pray. I remember the most difficult, the scariest conversations that I've had to have, which to me now wouldn't be scary, but as a person that is just starting out at ministry, who has been thrown into leadership with practically zero training, just a pep talk,
And just being young and fresh off the boat.
no life experience whatsoever. I mean, I have little experience now. Then I had like -5. So,
How does that work?
I don't know. But so some of the serious conversations that I had to have, I was not qualified in the sense of trained to have those kind of conversations. I was having to speak to people far older than myself with more experience and all that. So, and I remember the only thing that helped me was praying and asking the Holy Spirit to just lead, guide me, and the most difficult conversations. That's exactly what happened. So, number one is pray for me. I have a few more, but that's not.
We'll keep going because it says, what do you do to prepare? So not just the first thing, what do you do to prepare? So you pray.
Right. Remind yourself of the goal. What is the goal of this conversation? What are you hoping to achieve? If it, are you hoping to just prove yourself right? Then the conversation might not be worth having. A difficult conversation, anyway. It's, yeah. If it's to fulfill your office, help the other person, do your duty, then yeah, those would be acceptable, worthy, and at the least acceptable intentions or goals.
Mm-hmm.
Number three, if you have difficulty speaking on the fly, like myself, I'm not that great when it comes to speaking just on the spot, having to think. I'm a processor, as Mary Sue likes to say, right? I hear something and then I write it down and then I have to think about it. And
you need to have time to process.
I really do. I'm not that good. Like Victoria, she's different. She can think on the spot. That I don't have that gift. So if you have difficulty speaking on the fly, like myself, then write out your points or write out what you want to say and you can read it. It's okay if you do that.
I would add, even if you don't have difficulty speaking, because it is a hard conversation to have, you should do that anyways, right?
I mean,
You
it's
should.
good practice.
It's a good
It'll
practice.
keep you on track, especially when the conversation is difficult. It's really easy to just veer off and get distracted. It's nice to have that on paper. That way you don't do that.
Yeah.
And lastly, number 4 is seek advice. Talk to people that are older. I know in today's day it's not really a big deal if somebody's older.
Well,
it doesn't seem like it. Like when I was growing up, it was a big deal. And I think one of the big reasons is because of access to information. Back when I was a kid, which was like a year ago, there wasn't a whole lot of access to information. You had to go to the library. You know, the internet obviously was around. I'm not that old, but
if you could get a ride
if
to
you
the
get
library.
but most people didn't have just internet in their homes, or at least the people that I knew.
We had some encyclopedias, but that's it.
Yeah, so you had to rely on people that had more experience, who knew more than you to get there, and that's the way it was. That's the way it has been for millennia. Uh, Today, every kid has a phone. He just goes on there, finds out whatever he wants, and now he knows something. And now you don't care if this person has more experience. Guess what? You read on Google that A, B, and C.
Unfortunately, as you're talking, I'm thinking about it. The difficult part is, got a comment. Let me know when you're done reading. Unfortunately, the difficult part because it's a double-edged sword having all this information, is we're so quick to Google it, do our research, as we like to say. But the thing is, we don't see the person behind the information provided. Whereas, like, if you have a grandpa, a dad, a mother, a grandma, somebody in your life who you've seen their life, you've seen how they handle conversations, then you're like, okay, I can go to this person and I can trust that I'm probably going to get reliable advice. The sucky part about the internet is you have no idea most of the time, because most people just go to Wikipedia. They don't even look for a reliable source to begin with.
Wiki.
Or on Reddit, some Joe tells you great advice, like people seeking marital advice and serious difficulties in their life. They're posting them on Reddit for anybody to comment.
Yeah.
So I think that's where part of the issue is, literally that you don't know who you're receiving advice from, and has their life proven that their advice is worth something. But then I want to take it even a step back, is I think our culture has shifted away from seeking advice. Kind of like you were preaching on Sunday. We've come to this place of, I need to figure it out on my own. I need to make my own path. So I think even just seeking advice first is a difficult step for a lot of people. But as we know in Proverbs, there's wisdom and counsel. But a lot of people don't know the word either, so there's that. Yeah. But was that it for you?
That's the big ones, the big 4. Obviously there's other study,
yeah, that's
all that
just yours.
stuff, but these are the big 4 that I would probably tell somebody.
Yeah. Well, let's move. And he's sharing all the things that he's practiced. He's not just talking from nothing.
So, Cool Bean says, but honestly, I work at some people. So, you knew better. You're still green. I mean, that does happen a lot in workplaces. But I guess what I was talking about is more along the lines of helping somebody in their walk of life. When it comes to things like work, skills, for instance, a guy has been working at, a mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
For 5 years, He's been a dozer operator for 3 years. You, on the other hand, you had a farm and a dozer. Well, I don't know if you'd want a dozer on a farm. Whatever. You had a dozer. You were running your own projects, and for whatever reason, you had to get that job. And so you didn't do it professionally, but you've been doing it just because you love to operate dozers. You go in there, you have more skill than this guy who's only been running a dozer for 3-4 years, but he's been at the job longer, so he has more experience at the job. So that's a different dynamic when it comes to those kind of mechanical things. Not just machines. I'm saying when it comes to a skill, I have to do some kind of job, some work. Yeah, age doesn't necessarily dictate.
Can I hop in here just specifically to that point? And what I think is, so we were talking with our kid the other day, and the scripture, study the scriptures to show yourself approved. I was just talking to my son about that. I was like, you have to show yourself approved. So I think in this instance, some people, they're just talented, babe. Like, like you're really good with motor skills. Some people, for example, let's say this comment, she was green to the job, but she already had just natural talent, let's say, in whatever the area was. And people are not listening to her because she's still green. What I would say in this instance is you have to show yourself approved. Show that you know what you're talking about. Because naturally, us as people, we're just not gonna take very strongly a brand new person's opinion or direction or something. But that's what I found. Like at my job too, we would have nurses be hired, and I was just a nurse's assistant. But when they would be hired, a lot of times I would have to literally show them step by step their job that I just watched. I've never done it myself. But they would call me in because the first couple of times, as they were doing it, I would just kind of help them, assist them, and then they would start to see that I proved myself, that I do know what I'm talking about. So I do think there's people with natural talent that they just, like, some people are just good at communicating. They just are, you know. But I think that's the difficulty there is.
The communicating one, I don't know. I think there's people that have good personalities that are easy to relate to, that are easygoing, which really helps with communication, and that gives the impression. But I think communication is something that's learned. It's a skill that has to be learned. I may be wrong, but I'm not a believer that communication is a natural talent. I think there are character traits that make it easier for people to communicate and gives the impression, but I believe communication is a skill.
Okay.
But I could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
All the other stuff, I 100% agree with.
I don't know. I just think, just naturally thinking here, because I've never thought about it, if somebody could just naturally be good at communicating. But I think there are those people that just naturally are very good at listening. They're very good at seeing both sides, and those are really important. So I think they just, as a person, already have some of those, and they're very calm despite the conversation might be tense. So they already have a lot of the skills needed for communicating well. So that's what I think happens, and then they could obviously learn more and get better. You got some agreement. I don't have any apparently. Just kidding. But anyhow, that's what I would say to the still green. But I do think we do need to seek advice. But that's it. That's a long drawn out. Question number 2. Do you let the person know beforehand that it will be one of those difficult or hard conversations?
All right. Number 1, it depends on the situation. That's it.
What situation would warrant you to let them know and what wouldn't?
Well, the rest are the situations.
Oh, go ahead.
So, number 2, or I guess these are the situations.
A.
Right? 1A, 1.1. If you're a minister of some sort, I think you need to know your people. Minister, right? So we're talking about not necessarily when I say minister, somebody who has spiritual duties. Their office is to care for the spiritual welfare of the congregation, whether a select group or just generally or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Minister. You need to know your people. If it's a person that they avoid confrontation like the plague, might not be a good idea to tell them, hey, it's about your sucky character. If it's a person that,
It's just gonna run
they're
over
and just tell it to me straight, then definitely tell them, hey, it's about your character, or whatever the case may be. If you're not a minister but you need to talk to a minister, then it would help to tell them, hey, I need to talk about this, because then it'll help that minister to prepare so that they can help you, serve you.
Because then otherwise it's kind of ambush, you know.
Not just that, yes, and think about it logically. You're not, you want the best possible customer service in a store, right? Well, if you want the best service from a minister, because they are providing a service, they are serving you, give them what they need, give them the information. They could pray about it, they could research, they could prepare their own minds. Tell them, okay? Because I would appreciate that. As a minister, if somebody told me I need to talk about this, I would pray about it, I'd find scripture on it. I try to get prepared for the conversation, so I'm not sitting there going, yeah, and how do you feel about that? You know, like,
Well,
just useless.
well, yeah, your mind is not prepared, your emotions are not prepared. It literally does feel like ambush, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. If it's between friends, I think it does help to tell them most of the time. At least my friends, which I have extremely few friends, just if you don't know what I mean by friend, we had a podcast
You
on.
can say close friends. I think that is really key there because we do have friends.
I'm friendly with a lot of people,
Yeah,
a lot,
we do
but
have a lot of friends, but not a lot of close friends.
I don't use that word friend that way.
Remember, we talked about it during one of the home groups too, because,
Yeah.
for example, there are a lot of people in our church that you would consider a friend, but
That
then
I'm friendly with.
well, no, like you would go hang out with them. You would go.
Right. You can be friendly with someone and hang out with them and do everything that everybody else says. Oh, look, they're friends. You don't have to be friends to be friendly, to hang out, to spend time, all that kind
Okay,
of stuff.
guys, I'll convince him later. Let's keep going.
Fine, but I'll go along with what you're saying. Close friends.
I just think,
I
knowing,
can count on one hand how many close friends.
knowing our audience, because in the world today, a friend is someone who you can have a nice time with. You could hang out. They could kind of understand.
I understand it's really shallow,
Yeah.
But okay.
So he's saying a few close friends. Anyways, you were saying in regards to friends.
My close friends, I think each of them would appreciate if I told them, hey, I want to talk about this. So that goes to knowing the situation. And lastly, if it's a person in your team that you're leading, whether it's at church or at work or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm just based on my experience, which could be off, but it seemed to have helped or worked well. If it's a person in your team that you're leading, it usually helps to let them know what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
Usually helps to, because it's not just friends. It's not like they can just book it. If a person is on your team that you are leading, let's say if it's at work, they can't just be like, oh, no way, I don't want to talk. Like you're not going to tell the manager, you know what, I don't want to have this conversation. Well, I mean, you could, and you could lose your job. If it's at church and you have responsibilities and you avoid those responsibilities, again, that could mean you being relieved of your responsibilities.
Yeah.
So it usually helps to let them know what it's about. That way they know it's serious, they know what it's about, all that good stuff. So that's it for that one.
Got it. Probably the last one I'll ask for now.
Think you're on close friends.
Mm-hmm. Now they're agreeing with me. Okay, last question for now, and then I'll go into some basic have the hard conversation steps. So, what do you do if one or both of you are getting heated? Because, as we know, having hard conversations will usually bring in some heat. Fire.
Well, at home, you need to practice your vocal cords so that you can overpower the other person with your screaming and shouting.
Dory me practice.
Yeah, but if you don't want to take that route, I would say call it out, whether it's you or others. If it's you, be like, hey, I'm starting to lose my cool. I can't, if the other person is like, hey, dude, you're becoming very loud. I don't think this is being productive. I think it's becoming hurtful or whatever, however you want to phrase it. But you call it out, and if equilibrium cannot be achieved, then you need to reconvene. Okay.
So whether you're heated or they are heated, and
you don't have to use the word equilibrium, but you can just say, "Look, man, I can't talk like this. I don't think anything good is going to come out of this. We need to just
revisit
this, you know.
So he's talking about if you're just joining, whether you're getting heated or your person that you're talking to is getting heated. And he's saying, call it out. Like, I'm sorry, my emotions are getting out of order, or I'm having trouble controlling my tone. Let's revisit this. Or calling the person out, like, hey, I can see you're struggling, talking about this calmly. Let's revisit it when we're both. So that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other thing, if it seems to be an issue, like you just can't have a conversation without losing your cool, blowing your lid. I'm trying to think of other sayings, but if it seems to be an issue keeping your cool, then ask someone that maybe you both respect, or maybe that is neutral. If you can't find somebody that you mutually respect, at the very least, somebody who's neutral, somebody who's level-headed. Neutral as in like not biased towards either one of you. Ask them, hey, could you sit in on this conversation? Just kind of be a check. Like if one of us is getting on, like, hey, you're getting out of hand, or not necessarily. Uh, what you would call it, being a mediator. Even though if you agree to it, that would be great. If you both, as adults, obviously you can be like, hey, can you be the mediator? Yes, I can. And then it comes to the meeting, and you're just like, whatever. You could be childish like that. But if you're an adult, and as adults you agree, like, okay, this person is going to be our mediator. If you need a mediator, then you both agree. Like when that person says, hey, you're getting out of cool, you adjust your attitude and then continue forward. Usually that's more of like at a professional level, at a serious level. If it's between friends and you just ask somebody to sit in, not your friend to sit in, because that will immediately put the other person on the defense.
Yeah.
Nothing will get accomplished. It'll just push that person further away. And if it's their friend, then call that out. Be like, listen, I don't think this is right, because that's your friend, not mine. I think this is very one-sided. Somebody neutral, somebody you mutually respect. Anyways, I don't really want to repeat myself, but
well, another good thing is if it is a difficult conversation and you guys constantly are heated, it would be wise to have a witness, a neutral party.
I thought about putting a witness saying that, but that sounds a little too. It might sound a little too sharp for some people.
I know, but think about it. If you guys are prone
Even though technically you're correct.
Yeah, if you're prone to getting heated and you guys kind of get out of control, you need somebody from the side who'd be like, hey, did this did happen, you lost your cool, or you did say this out of anger, or blah blah blah, because sometimes it really helps. Like we've had times where we've had a conversation and it ended up being recorded, like something like this or something else, and we'd listen back and we could hear, oh man, I did talk that way, or oh man, I did raise my tone, or whatever.
Sometimes even suggesting like, hey, can we record this conversation, that way I can go back to it.
Yeah.
And see what's what. If there's a lot of he said, she said, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot, especially when they're difficult conversations. You have to be wise and approach them
Obviously,
carefully.
if you're at a professional level, then really look into that, whether you can record or not, So I'm just talking about at a personal, non-professional, non-legal way.
Yeah. So, that's all?
Yeah.
Because the last question I'm thinking.
And if you guys missed the previous two questions, I'd recommend you go back and listen to them.
Yeah.
Once this is done.
So, I just wrote down some common strategies that I myself have learned or seen online and in my own research and stuff. And interestingly enough, a lot of them you've mentioned, babe. But I'll just go through them. The first part is obviously preparation. A lot of people, I think, they don't think about the preparation part.
Are you answering your own questions, you said?
No, I'm doing the little bullet points of good steps to take for hard conversations. Anyways, what I was going to say is I think a lot of people skip the preparation step. They just wait to have the conversation. They kind of have a general idea of what they want to talk about, maybe how they want to talk about it. That's it. So, obviously, first is prepare. And Andre already shared the great things that he does. And it's funny because one of them that I wrote down is, what is the goal? What are you hoping to achieve? That's literally what you said too. You know, what do you want? What is the point of this conversation?
Maybe I'm subconsciously professional.
Yeah.
At communication.
When you want to be, and then when the Holy Spirit intervenes. Yeah. Anyways, that was the first part, is prepare beforehand. Pray about it. Think about it. Have a strategy. If things don't go your way, what are you going to do? Or the way that you think is right, not your way. And then the second part is keep yourself in check the entire conversation. What are my motives right now and what I'm saying? What are my emotions looking like?
Check yourself.
What is my tone? Look at them. Are they coming from a place of hurt? And you have to, reaffirm that, hey, I'm not saying this to hurt you. I love you. This conversation is for us to find common ground, or for us to grow. Constantly keep yourself in check the entire conversation. Because sometimes we think, oh, we're just speaking it how it is. But no, you're not. You're speaking it out of some hurt. And that's your motive. The next part is do your best to keep in mind their perspective. So put yourself in their shoes. Like if they're being told some really hard truth, they're probably going to get hurt. And we need to expect that a little. We need to be patient. Like, oh no, there she is crying again. You're telling her like hard information, something that's hard to take. Let her have a moment. Or
it might not be hard for you.
Yeah. You've thought about it. Let's say you've had time to prepare and stuff, and let's say she hasn't, or he's getting upset, frustrated. Let him have that moment, because within the context, that's a normal reaction. But we want, from our perspective, they should just be level-headed and be calm and just fine. Obviously, there's a difference if they continue the entire conversation off of that anger or whatever. That's different. So to keep their perspective in mind, like what is your relationship? What is the setting? Do they feel out of place? Are there a lot of other people here that made it extra uncomfortable? A lot of things you have to consider. Then be open to hearing them. Not most people are not just going to immediately agree with you, right? Have you ever found that where you just laid it all out and the person was just like, yep, yeah, you're right. That was the end. That would be great, but it's not that way usually, So you have to be open to hearing some back and forth. You have to be open to some opposing opinions, to some conversation, maybe some explaining you need to do. Like they're like, well, what brought this on? Or how come we're talking about this? Or why did you feel like you were the one to bring this up? Be open to these things and be willing to talk about it. Another part is that I really like is focus on facts and solutions. A lot of times we don't focus on facts. We focus on what it felt like, what it seemed like, what somebody else said about something else, instead of focusing on, so this is what happened, blah, 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 and then also focusing like, this is what I think we could do to move past this. Or this is what I could do to help us move past this. So facts and solutions.
I could leave.
Yeah. And then again, something that you mentioned is staying on topic. And as you mentioned, something that I really like is if you have bullet points written down what you want to talk about and don't stray, the conversation will go so much better if you just stay on topic, standpoint. Because once all these other things get introduced, it's like this giant tree with all these branches. It's really hard to get back to the point, and now all these other extra things and issues have been introduced.
Yeah, if while you're writing your notes of what you need to talk about, you think of, oh man, I would want to mention this, but it's not directly relevant, write it on the bottom of the list. So do your the most relevant points, and then on the bottom, after you've talked about this and settled on it, if you have time and if the person is willing, you can then address those points.
If they're in the right mood, if they're not broken, if they're open to conversation, there's a lot of things they'll need to weigh before bringing up the next topic. Might not be the place, And so last one is practice active listening. And we actually had talked about that on our minister retreat, actually respecting them, looking at in their eyes, listening,
beautiful eyes.
listening to what they're saying and actually hearing them, like, repeating back to them what they've said to make sure you understand. But the one thing that Andre didn't, that's pretty much on my list of really easy, quick points to have a hard conversation. One thing that Andre didn't mention that I really appreciate that he does during conversations, maybe that's really loud in the, we'll need to like write down somewhere how many times I bring this up. Anyways, something that Andre, as I've seen him have hard conversations, something that he does that I appreciate. He will sit there and as the person is talking, he will take notes. Sometimes if it's something that really stood out to him, he will write it like a direct quote from the person. The reason this to me seems like a very good idea and something that I've seen was because when he's like, so you said, quote, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to address that. When you're directly quoting, you're not like, you're not saying your interpretation of what they said.
One of the worst things you can do is paraphrase.
Yeah, because
obviously not all the time. It's not like you're
in conversating,
but when you're trying to address something serious and you paraphrase and it's not
correct.
Because paraphrase is repeating it except basically what was meant
through your interpretation.
So if you get the interpretation wrong, then you're showing them that I'm not really listening.
Well, and that
I'm not hearing what you're saying. I'm trying to tell you what I think.
And that just sparks another well, that's not what I said. That's not what I meant. So then you're really
he
not
said,
getting.
She said.
Yeah, you're really not getting. For example, well, you told me that you were angry that I didn't put away my laundry. Well, no, I said that frustrates me. Okay, well, you were frustrated that I didn't put away my laundry. Well, no, I was frustrated that you put your laundry on the floor. And so it just brings up all these branches again. Whereas the point is this.
Yes, I took my dirty socks and I put them on the floor. And that frustrates her.
But anyways, no, I was just trying to think of something really relatable. Yeah. But do you see how, but instead saying like, hey, I heard you say that you're frustrated that I put my dirty socks on the floor there. And in response to that, I want to say blah, blah, blah. So
deal with it.
There's no more conversation being had about, is this how they said it? Or is this how I interpreted it? That's why I really like when something stands out to him, he'll note it on paper and quote it. The reason the noting is super important is because you actually allow the person to finish what they wanted to say, and then you address.
And it shows that you were listening.
Yeah, and then you address topics. And something else he does that I really appreciate is he's like, hey, I'm listening, I'm just taking notes, okay? And then he'll start taking his notes.
Because sometimes I'll use my phone because I can't write as fast as I can type, as most people.
Yeah.
And if they don't know that, and they just see me on my phone, it's like, well, that's
yeah, that could look as really disrespectful or not listening or not caring to look in the eyes. But that was one thing that I took for myself really from the side that I thought was a very good listening and conversation skill that I hadn't really read anywhere or heard from anybody is the note taking. And as we all know, like, I'm that person. Andres, sometimes he'll read something he wrote to me and he's into the first line and I already have questions. He's like, can you just let me finish reading it and then you can ask your questions? And my first response is what? Do you remember? Whenever I start bombarding you with...
I'll forget about it.
Yeah. And the thing is, I will. By the time he's done reading his whole paper, I already forgot half the things I wanted to bring up. But because I kept interrupting him with questions, I never got to hear his entire point in its entirety. I just heard bits and pieces and what my mind got stuck on and then whatever extra information he added. Whereas if I had let him finish his entire point, then I would have all the information going in and then I can address if I still want to now address these things. So just things for you to think about, especially if you're in the ministry. You're going to have hard conversations and we have to be that much more careful carefuler.
Carefuler.
Because it has to do with life and death. It has to do with a person's soul. It has to do with their walk before the Lord, which in my opinion is the first most sacred thing. You know, like, okay, let's say we got in an argument, but it's going to be a lot worse if he influences my relationship with God in a bad way.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times we're a little bit reckless with our conversations. And then remember this morning when we were talking about how, let's take that a step further. Do we put in this much care into our everyday conversations with each other, like husband and wife, mother and son, brother and sister, child and parent? We're very careful, some of us, when it comes to work conversations or ministry conversations, but then a lot of that gets thrown out the window when we're talking to people that we're comfortable with.
Well, because when it comes to people you're comfortable with, you're not worried that there might be repercussions or consequences. Like if you're mean to your close person, whoever that
Mm-hmm.
is, you're really comfortable. You're not like, if I say this, they're gonna sever our partnership or whatever the case may be.
Or they're going to take it the wrong way.
You don't have that. Well, no, even if they could take it the wrong way, you're not worried that there could be severance of some sort. At work, you need to watch what you say, because if you don't, if you say something you're not supposed to, you could be severed from your relationship to that company.
Well, that's where I meant that at work they could take it the wrong way, so you're extra nervous.
Right, but the end concern there is severance,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they take it the wrong way, but there was no concern of severance
for consequence,
that's fine. Who cares if they take it the wrong way,
Yeah.
But and so that's what I feel happens with people that we're comfortable with, especially family, because um, you don't think, like, if I say, if she takes it the wrong way or whatever, she's gonna be like, bye, which unfortunately, because of our nature, fallen genetics, that it's difficult to keep that in mind.
Yeah. You know what I think too? For me, the reason I kind of let my guard down or throw the information I know out the window when I'm having conversations with people that I know well is I assume they will understand it and take it exactly the way I meant it.
You and every other woman.
Well, I think that's most of us. Like, let's say
right.
When you're talking to me, right? When you're bringing up a concern, you come into the conversation thinking that, this is my wife. She's going to know I'm coming from a good place. She's going to know what I'm struggling with. So I think with people that we're comfortable with, we come in with this false assumption with this assumption that they're going to understand us exactly how we mean it, knowing our character and how we usually talk, and that we usually mean good, but I think the problem is we shouldn't assume that, because there are going to be days, like, let's say I really want to share something that you've been doing that's bothering me, but you came home from a horrible day at work. Chances are you're not going to receive it the way I meant it, despite you knowing my character, despite you knowing that I love you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I think we do is, oh, well, this is my husband. I can tell him anything. And we always talk about this, so it's okay. So instead of approaching it wisely and carefully and look at the circumstances and maybe what the day was like, we just assume that we're going to understand that the person, they know me well enough, at least for me. Because I've thought back, like, our conversations a lot of times, think about it, like, most of our um, disagreements were just because of misinterpreting what the other person meant. And look, one of the comments is, misinterpreting also usually starts a fire. It does. Yeah, the assumption that they better understand. Yeah. Because sometimes, let's say, if I'm sharing some kind of frustration with my husband and I'm assuming that he's my husband, these are his kids, he's going to understand.
Well, no, she meant like, you better understand this, or like the demand that they need to understand.
Yeah. Well, what I'm talking about too is, let's say, there's a frustration that with the kids that I want to bring up to you, and I'm expecting you to understand they're your kids. We deal with them together, but sometimes it'll actually work out where another mom will understand me better. Because she knows that she's went through it, she's living that herself, But here I'm assuming that no, my husband is gonna understand me exactly how I mean. He's gonna know what I'm talking about. So
wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to kind of say is, I don't know, like I'd want to see the research, but there's a reason why assumption is so negatively spoken of.
Yeah. Well, they say assumption is the mother of all mess ups, except said in a bit different way. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a really
And we're
good
guilty
reason
of that too, So for nobody to feel
I mean, speak for yourself.
yeah, for nobody to feel pointed out or anything, but the other part is our assumptions are really based off of us. I'm not assuming things based solely off of him. I'm assuming them based off of how I interpreted it, based off of my feelings that day, based off of how whatever I saw. A lot of times we don't even know everything, and we've made assumptions. And I do this, and I think I know all the facts. And he's called me out on it before. You weren't there. You don't know all the facts. But from my point of view, I see all the facts. There's nothing more to be told.
Yeah, and just so we'd have an understanding, assumption means you have an opinion that's based off of incomplete or a complete lack of
information.
You don't have all the facts. You don't have all the information. You don't know, but you are either deciding on an opinion or proceeding with or taking action um, without knowing all those facts. And the problem with that is sometimes you think you know, like Victoria's saying, but you don't. Which is why, especially when it comes to conversations, even if you think that you know what the facts are, it's always a good idea to be like, hey, this and this is true, right? Or this is how you feel, right? Ask the question,
Clarify.
and then once you get the confirmation, proceed. Or if what you thought was true turns out that's not the case, you will have saved yourself a lot of headache, and you're still able to access that person's heart or mind.
Yeah, and there's communication
able
to
to
be
have
had.
a conversation.
Yeah. What I thought is you would absolutely love is one of the definitions for us to assume is to usurp.
Mm-hmm.
Thought you would find that interesting. But it's to take on. So, for example, one thing that we were talking about, Andre was kind of showing you one of his plans.
Look, I've assumed this station, or I
Yeah,
assumed this
I've
role.
taken on something that is not for me to take on. I've received some thought or some opinion or some fact that was not mine to take on. And so recently, Andre and I were having a conversation. He showed me some plan that he came up with, and immediately I was like, "You're rushing into this," and he's like, "Well, no, I'm not. I'm trying to figure out if I need to do this or should I not do it." What I could have done and said, "When do you plan to do this? Or what is your plan to put this into action?" So then I had to go back because he called me out on it. I had to go back and restructure how I brought that up. And I love those people that will go like, "Hey, this is what it seems like this is what you're doing, but I could be wrong. What are you doing? Or is this what you're doing?" Like, it would really help us. And that's actually a giant point in active listening is asking open-ended questions. Just not yes, no. Like, you don't give the person a chance to communicate, but asking questions like, "What's your plan here?" Or, "And why do you think that?" I mean, it sounds very like a therapist and stuff, but there's a reason why they're so good at communicating.
Well, that's really what a therapist is. You have a skill set, and you're supposed to communicate something. Well, it's not every, depending on the kind of therapy,
But a lot of it is
I'm not talking about
communication.
physical therapy, and even though in physical therapy there still is communication, but for instance, like counseling, that's all about communication, not just about knowing what's wrong, but about communicating that to the person, getting into a place where they can communicate back to you. Anyways, there's a lot about communication. Words are definitely a foundational thing. A foundational. Christ is the cornerstone, and Christ is the Word. and everything was created through and by and for the Word Christ. So words, they like my friend Levi says, words they mean things. Words are hard, so we really need
So
to take
simple,
extra
but
care.
so true.
Yeah.
We should quote that or write that in quotes somewhere. A wise man once said, "Words, they mean things."
Words mean things.
And he'll do that. Words, they mean things.
And I always tell him, no, they don't.
Oh,
Already.
I'm surprised you didn't come up with that. No, I'm just kidding. But really quickly, because we were on the topic of assumption, and it does seem like well, here's a comment. A big thing for us is asking, are you being mean? Or what are you trying to say? Because often one person is being playful or joking, and the other goes on the defense.
I've definitely never done that.
Yes, you're very skilled at never doing that.
Yes.
But no, see, that's a perfect example. One that I think I shared at one of our home groups too. There were like these little helpful hints online about how to have good, healthy communication within a marriage. And one thing they were saying, like for example, I feel like you don't love me, and that's what the lady will say. And then the guy is just left like, okay, I don't know, maybe men say that too. I'm just speaking from my perspective as a lady, and they'd be like, that literally what that does is shuts the other person down. Now they're running through their life like, what did I do? Is this all the time? Blah, blah. It just really opens up this can of worms. Whereas instead of, hey honey, we'll go back to the socks example. Hey honey, when you place your socks on the floor, not in the laundry basket, it really makes me feel unloved. Like my efforts aren't appreciated, and you know this work is being added to my daily job, blah blah blah. Then you're not putting them on the defense. You're sharing with them what action is making you feel that way. And wouldn't you be much more open to talking about it? For example, I said, hey honey, when you do this, it really makes me feel unloved, instead of, I feel like you don't love me. And they seem close, but even in that there is skill. Instead of me assuming that he doesn't love me, well, some people go further. They will say flat out, you don't love me, or else you would put your socks away. But there's skill in that, in how you approach it. There's wisdom in that. Are you going to approach them and immediately put them on defense, which brings no good outcome? Or are you going to approach it and show them that you're open to talking about it? You want to hear what they want to say, that you want to come to a solution, My question is, don't want to assume, but when is your due date? We're not expecting. Oh, goodness. August 3rd, I believe. I can fly.
Do everything? No.
So the last part, the really, really last question that I just wanted to bring up.
Really, really last one.
Before we go, is we're going to go one step back. How do you recognize that you do need to have a tough conversation? We kind of mentioned it a little bit on the previous podcast, but in ministry, because this is equipping the saints. So in ministry, how have you noticed that it's time to have one of those conversations that's gonna suck?
When it's either interfering with the daily routine, it's interfering with my the way I process things. I start filtering things through, bitterness or anger.
A sort of lens.
Yeah, when it starts painting everything I do.
Mm.
When I notice that which goes to what I just said, but when you start noticing that it's affecting your judgment, if you're not able to make an unbiased, neutral judgment, you need to address that. When you notice yourself harboring something, some kind of either anger or bitterness or hurt or offense, when you can't bless that person easily, like if you can't, blessing your enemies is always hard, but that shows spiritual maturity. But if blessing friends or your brother and sister in Christ shouldn't be hard. And if it is hard, then you need to check yourself. You need to ask yourself, am I harboring something?
Is it time to talk
Is
about
it time to talk? You know what I mean? And just because you're harboring something does not mean that person is doing something wrong. It could be that you're the one with the issue and you need to check yourself. You need to adjust your attitude because they're not doing anything wrong. So that's a big one. But let's say that they are doing something wrong that's actually wrong, or might not be wrong, but what they're doing is really affecting you, and maybe it is your problem. Make sure you approach with that, like, hey, I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong. This is just me, but as a brother and sister in Christ, I felt like I could talk to you. What you're doing, this and this, is really bothering me. I'm wondering if
how we could figure this out.
If you could help me out with that, or if how we can move on.
Yeah, because sometimes it is your issue, but if you're struggling, like let's say, like I love my coffee. It would bug me if somebody would come out and go, hey Victoria, drink my coffee and then keep talking and then drink some more. That would bother me.
Yeah. I think it would bother any sane person.
Well, no, some people don't care. They'll share everything with everybody.
Like I said, it'll bother any sane person.
Okay, I can think of a perfect example right now, so we're just gonna go with this
one. Don't touch my coffee.
Ooh, I think Mom's here. Anyways.
Like, do not touch my coffee.
Let me know 1 second. Think about an example if you don't like mine.
Like, where's your problem?
Yeah, but it's a legit problem that you can or should bring up.
Oh, gee. Let's see here. I don't know. I don't have any problems with anyone.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm thinking, for example, let's say...
That was a joke.
Yeah. It's hard to... In a ministry example. Let's say somebody, when you're a leader of some group, and somebody, do you want to click the... Let's say you lead some sort of ministry at church, and one of your people that's under you, every time you're trying to have a serious conversation, they'll laugh and make jokes. And let's say they do it once in a while. They'll just laugh or crack a joke, and you'll just kind of like, oh, okay, whatever, it's fine, ignore it. But that could be a you issue where you just can't, be...
Sorry.
There you go. Someone who likes to punch your arm every time they see you.
Right, exactly. But that's not necessarily just me. If they're punching my arm, it's okay to say, like, well, I guess it's not a sin,
Well, if you're just like this, but if you're punching, that's not, I know.
This is not punching.
I know. What I'm saying is most people, us ladies, we like to just go like, honey.
Okay, but
honey.
That's not punching.
But I'm saying...
Even though that is extremely annoying.
What I'm saying is that one could be a you issue. But punching, I think, is now a...
I think that's even a better thing. Like, sometimes we're just driving or whatever, and, Victoria wants to say something to me. She's like, honey. Like... You already got my attention.
What would you do? What would you do?
I'm sometimes even looking at her.
Look.
Sometimes I'm even looking at her and talking. She's talking at me. She's like,
no,
like, bro,
no. Hold on.
Don't
this
touch
is
me.
What usually happens. This is me. Hey, honey. Hey, honey.
No, when I'm driving. Okay,
but I'm talking about the normal. And so I'll talk to him. And for me, it's very important for someone to look at me when we're talking.
Okay. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm just giving you an example of when somebody's not doing something necessarily wrong.
I know.
Like, for instance, when I'm looking at you and you're excited about something or whatever, and then you're going like this.
Wife is an exception.
Of course it is.
But anyways, back to my good example in regards relating to the church.
My example wasn't good.
Yeah. No, I'm just going back to the good example that I came up with that relates to the church. So, let's say... you're trying to have a conversation with your team. And there's a person that will once in a while just crack a joke. It's not bad what they're doing. But let's say it's irritating you. So that would be a good example of, it's not wrong what they're doing, but I should probably bring up like, hey, could you please wait till I'm done with my point that I'm making and then crack all the jokes you want. You know, and then you could just bring that up. Like, it's really hard to keep on track and to finish my point and to keep the serious atmosphere when I'm trying to put across this point and you're making jokes. That's not a issue, let's say, that they're sinning against you, but it is something that should probably be brought up. But if anything they say irritates you, that's a you problem and you need to figure it out. You know? But there was that. The other part that I wanted to bring up for you to address.
Yeah, see, you're not supposed to physically violate me. Alright?
Women don't get an excuse to physically violate their husbands.
So stop physically violating me.
Anyhow, what is an example, because you talked about from your side within the church, what is an example, like if it's ministers under you, workers under you, school teachers under you, other pastors under you, when do you see it an appropriate time to have the hard conversation coming from their side, like for you to address something within them or to them?
If I see that, well, first of all, you would have to link something that they're doing with their performance, their attitude. When you see something like, for the attitude is off, they're lacking on, or they're falling behind in their responsibilities, something is out of the norm. You can operate at a stellar level, but then you can operate at just fulfilling your requirements. When you're just fulfilling your requirements, see, in ministry, and here's the thing about ministry: if you're doing only what you're required to do, that means, it's not it's good.
It's just the bare minimum.
But it is the bare minimum, and if the person is only doing just to fulfill the requirements for a long time, then you need to address that, because in ministry, as you grow in the Lord, you're gonna get, um, and I want to be careful how we use the word passion, because people use that word to excuse everything. But you start growing in the Lord, you start going beyond the minimum.
You get on fire.
Minimum requirements. Well, again, I want to avoid using any kind of like emotional words like passion or fire, because a lot of people have used those to excuse wrong behavior.
You can just use the scripture. Whatever you do it like you do it. You're doing it for Christ. You wouldn't just do bare minimum for the Lord.
Right. So if you notice a plateau, you need to, it would be good to address that. If you notice judgment is not
skewed,
quite there, if a lot of people are bringing you the same complaints about the same person in various forms, but principally the same thing, you need to address that. So because you, as a leader of a team, a ministry team, your first area of responsibility is the spiritual welfare of your minister team. That's how you will serve the congregation. It's not by you serving the congregation
and they'll
with
figure it
them,
out.
like all of you are doing the same thing. You need to oversee your ministers to make sure they are fit and ready and taken care of, so that then they can take care of the congregation. That might seem like, well, you're separating yourself, you're not really serving the people. Yes, you are. Somebody has to take care of the ministers, because they are the most neglected group of people in all of Christendom. Okay, is the ministers. That's why Paul says you need to watch yourself, lest you help everybody else make it, but then at the end you discover that you're lacking, that you're not making the race. So you have to keep a check on yourself, but also if you're a leader of ministers, you need to look after your ministers. So you need to watch, behaviorisms, attitude. If people are bringing the same thing,
know their lives.
Maybe if people are bringing the same complaint, it might be that the ministers just, they're trying to do a good thing, but they're not executing it well. You need to train them in that, educate, lift, uplift, support. Sometimes you'll have to defend if it's just like one person, for instance, didn't like what they said, and they're complaining on them. Maybe they're just being a whiner. They're not wanting to take, you know what I mean? So you just have to keep an eye on what's going on. You have to be aware.
One last one, and then we will close up.
Yes.
Some people like to address the issue right away. So I was thinking, for example, I'm kind of that way. I like to, if I see a problem, I like to address it right then and there, for it not to grow. My question for you would be, how would you know, or what would be the wise way to approach? Should this be addressed right away? This hard conversation, like they just have a sucky character, and you just, hey, this character is not going to do for this lead position or whatever. Or is it something that you give time and then approach it later?
Right. If they have a sucky character, they shouldn't be in a lead position. Or at the very least, you shouldn't put them in a lead position if they have a sucky character. If they have a sucky character and they already are in a lead position, and for whatever reason, maybe you stepped into the lead position, you're overseeing this, and they were already there. Then it is your responsibility to call it out and have a conversation. If there are no changes, then you need to take appropriate action.
Well, for example, so my thing is I like to wait and see. So let's say there's a leader.
Here's the problem. Sorry. There's a problem with that.
Well, let me give you a specific example. That way you can know what to address. Because we see this is perfect. Like I have an idea of what I'm talking about, and he has his idea of what I'm talking about. So let's say someone under me, a lead, one of their issues is they will kind of cut people off. Like, or I'm trying to think of a good. So let's say they're talking to their team, and I observe that sometimes they'll kind of cut them off and just continue what they're talking about. And I see that happen once. Do I immediately have that hard conversation, or do I do what I would usually do? Is I would wait and see if this is a normal behavior, if they do this often. Was it needed in that specific situation? You know.
Right.
So
well, first of all, it's not a hard conversation. Me personally, I tell them your attitude sucks. You need to change it. Or this approach is wrong. People are not listening to you because you're not letting them talk. Like that's not, in my opinion, that's not a hard conversation.
So I brought it up, so it is a hard conversation.
Okay, well, a hard conversation, I would just tell them. I wouldn't wait to see if they change. I'd tell them, hey, I observed this. This is what needs to change. Please work on it. And if the same thing keeps happening, then you have a hard conversation, which is like, we need to discuss your future in this role.
Another thing is what we classify as a hard conversation is different to everybody, Well, here's
it's your responsibility to call that out, by the way.
Yeah. Well, here's my reservation. I don't want to be the person that will call everything out. There are those people where
if you're in a lead position, you don't have a choice.
Well, no, because, for example, with our kids, I'm in their lead position. I'm in a lead position, right, at home. In one of the lead positions, obviously. They do things wrong all day long. Kids do. They did that, they touched that, they blah, blah, blah.
Right.
This is where my concern is, because I've seen this happen many times throughout different ministries and people in churches and stuff, is you have those kind of leaders that will point out every single thing. And from watching that, I have learned to wait and see. Like, is this something that, yes, it's a problem, but after watching them a little bit, I see that they're actually working at it. Or I hear them talking to somebody else, and they're like, yeah, I know I'm really quick to, like, point things out, but I'm trying to slow down, whatever, That's where I find wisdom in. And there have been a lot of times where I shouldn't have waited and seen. I should have approached it right then and there, but I'm struggling to find the balance. Like, how do you know this is something that needs to be approached right now, and this is something where I need to see?
Right. So if it's something that they are personally struggling with, you could wait or approach it softly or whatever the case. If it's causing harm to the mission or to the team or to others, the congregation, you need to address it. You can't just sit there and wait while people are getting wounded, the team is getting damaged, people are leaving the team, all sorts of things are happening, or you see the seeds of that beginning to happen. You need to address it. You have to address it. Yeah. It's not just a matter of, should I? You need to.
Well, see, have I won you over a tiny bit? For example, let's say.
No, I don't disagree. What I was talking about is, I wanted to say this even before, when I was like, and you're like, It's
Yes, that's how I acted. Assumption.
that's
We
what
need
you're
to have
doing.
an assumption sign.
Right. Harm. The differentiating factor there is damage or harm being caused, or is it beginning to? Like for instance, somebody if somebody takes a mallet, right, a sledgehammer, and starts hitting the wall, you're like, well, if I start seeing cracks, by then it's a little.
Okay.
You're a little late to the game there.
That's a little excessive, I think.
No. Think of it figuratively.
Well, let's go
okay?
back. No. I'm saying, you know how you said if you see that people are starting to leave, people are getting hurt, and what I'm saying, let's go back to the initial thing.
If people are already leaving, then
yeah, it's too late.
You're very late. To
yeah.
To that
what I'm talking about is how we initially talked about. Let's say this leader, I observed that they cut somebody off in the car. They were talking to their team. Somebody started talking and just cut them off and continued bulldozed right through, for example. That's our favorite word. We bulldoze and also. And you said you'd call them out right on it right away. And I'm saying,
well, not necessarily in the meeting.
I know, you mean in at some point.
Yeah, I would have, hey, I noticed this, I don't know if it's a thing, but, that's, you need to watch
maybe that would be the key. Because I'm thinking, let's say you decided, I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to come to the next meeting and see if this is a regular thing. And let's say you come to the next meeting and you watch them and they cut them off and they're like, I'm sorry, that was not right. Finish what you were saying. You're like, oh, okay, so they are working on it, so there's no need for me to step in. And that's what I meant, like, in those type of, but I think what happens often is we just ignore it and never follow up, never check, never approach. And I think that's what I like in yours is that you bring it up right away, meaning, privately, not call them out unless that's warranted already in the situation. A lot of times that's not. And ask you, like, is this something you're aware of? Are you working on that? Do you know that this is an issue? I like that. Is bringing it up, but in that way.
If it's contained. If during a meeting they say something and I see that it has caused damage, then I will call it, hey, that was inappropriate. Because then I'm doing two things at once. I'm addressing the issue and I'm showing that the other person that this issue is being addressed, which is comforting. Otherwise, privately, you got to talk to that person.
That's healing.
Then you got to talk to that person. Hey, by the way, I talked to him or her.
Yeah.
It's just a very inefficient way of doing it.
Yeah.
So the damage and harm, that's the biggest thing, whether it's in a meeting or not. So containment.
Yeah. And that's the sucky part of us, being in ministry and in leadership is, despite us having our own struggles, like I'm quite impatient when people are talking, as you can see on these lives, that I want the person to finish their sentence faster, get to their point. Like, what are you trying to say? And that's something that I have to work on. But if I see a team member that has the same issue, I'm going to be like, hey, you need to be a little more patient. And I could even bring up examples of my own struggles with that and what I've learned. But it's funny, we should have probably just first, as you like, we should have first done definitions of what a hard conversation is, because me and you.
Well,
for me, hard ranges from.
Hard conversation is pretty relative, though. You can't have a definition on it.
That's what I was saying, because we were an example of that. For me, calling out somebody and their character when I know I have my own issues is already a hard conversation.
Of course, if you're the kind of person that has the gift of calling people out, it's one thing when you make it your business to go around and tell people, the things that they're lacking. That's where I'd be like, dude, look at yourself.
That's my business.
You need to really check yourself, dude. But if it is your duty, if you are in a position where that is part of your responsibility list, your responsibilities, your duties, it's not a matter of, well, how are you in that? Yes, you can use that as a moment to learn for yourself. Like, hey, I have to call this person out, and yet I have some of those same issues. Use that as a learning moment. Use that as inspiration to work on your own issues. But that does not excuse you from addressing the issue, because you're responsible. You must do that. It goes beyond you, because when you're in ministry, when you're in service, you have to think beyond yourself. Well, I'm not worthy. That may be so, but that does not excuse you from fulfilling your responsibilities.
Or you know what? Go grab someone who is worthy of bringing that up. Bring them with you. You know, for example, let's say I have a team member under me who's a guy and he has some issues and I see them. I can totally go and grab my husband and be like, hey, this is what I've noticed. This is what needs to be addressed. Can you come with me and talk with this person? You know, because I think, for example, like let's say if I watch this person cutting people off in their leadership position, but I do the same thing, I might be not the exact right person to talk to them about it, but I can bring somebody who is. Bring them in. Me as the authority being like, hey, this is an issue, but because I also struggle in this, I wanted to bring this person in who's good at not doing this, or you know.
That sounds like a good idea, and it may be in some instances. I don't know, but typically, like I wouldn't take that approach because it is not some other person's responsibility. If you want to do that, then you got to do a seminar.
Well, did you hear how I said that you still maintain the authority? Like, hey, you
right,
cannot do
but
this.
You are undermining yourself.
Well, if, for example, like let's say under my leadership, I also cut them off. So a lot of it is probably because.
Well, then you just tell them that, like, hey, I noticed you're cutting people off, and looks like you and I need to work on this. And let's make an agreement. Both of us work on this.
Yeah.
If you see me cutting off, pull me to the side and let me know, and I will do the same there.
Yeah.
You could approach it that way,
There's
but bringing in somebody else,
Well, no, what I was saying, if you heard it, is I would say this is wrong what you're doing, but because I also struggle with this,
I heard what you said.
Well, look, I brought in this person to share how they don't do that. Not for them to.
Okay. I heard what you said. What you could do is get advice from that person, and relay it. But like pulling, I may be wrong about this, but pulling somebody in, that just undermines. You're giving the impression that hey, you're teaming up against that person.
I guess
you're pulling in people to like, hey, me plus look at this person. Yeah. It's not.
I feel like you're missing one very crucial point is in that me saying, for example, but because I see that I also struggle with cutting people off, I wanted to bring in this person for them to share with us how they.
Okay, there's the key. Us. That's why I said seminar. If you assemble your team, you bring a person, and be like, hey, look, guys, I want to be transparent. Look, I struggle a little bit in this. I've noticed some of us do as well.
Yeah.
Here's a person that can, teach us some things.
I guess that makes sense. But see.
But in a private conversation, again, in a non-professional, or if you're not talking about, a official ministry position. Okay, if it's between friends or whatever, totally, that's really cool. But I'm talking about in a church professional setting. Okay, yeah. I know some people don't like that when you mix church and professionalism, but there has to be guidelines. Okay.
Well, see, I'm speaking from my own. We do have comments, see, like where it's a perfect example. Like a man leader of a group might need to approach a woman about something, so they might want to introduce another woman into the conversation. So that's kind of one of the things I was talking about. But one thing why I feel like that would be appropriate, because for example, if I have a leader who has the same struggle and they call me out on it, I am there will be almost no value in my eyes in what they have to say. I don't care if they're calling me out on it. If you're struggling with this and you're calling me out on it and you have some advice to offer me, first show me that you are.
Then don't give advice.
No, what I'm saying is, me speaking from that other leader that's
right. So you, as a leader, if you encounter that, then don't try to give advice. Don't try to be sitting there and preaching at them. Be like, hey, I noticed this issue. Could you please address it? And if you feel like the need for it, be like, hey, like I said, we both have that issue. Let's make an agreement. Let's work on it together. Yeah. You call me out, I'll call you out.
Yeah, I like that. But just to be clear, I didn't say to always bring in a person. I was saying if it warrants that. Because I do think you can privately just address things. You don't have to include other people. I was saying, like the comment says, that if it warrants it. Because most situations won't. But I think there are some unique situations where it would be smart to bring in some side person. Some situations. That's what I'm saying. But that's we just talked about it.
I
Like if
said
a man needs to bring in a woman to talk to a woman, or for example, there are some situations where it would be warranted.
in those kind of cases, yeah.
Yeah, but that's just me. Like I said, I don't care if you're like, well, I struggle with this too, but you need to work, and I'd be like, okay, work on it, and then when you're done,
When
you
it
can
involves the sexes, that's totally different.
Yes.
I think.
But that's why I was
Character
saying.
issues, totally different.
But that's why I was saying to bring in somebody else, possibly sometimes, because that's maybe it's not a great character, maybe it's a character flaw in me, but if I see that you can't get it in order, why are you rebuking me in it? You need to find somebody else to come talk to me about it and show me a good example of how to do it right. You know?
Well,
So,
then that's when you, as the worker in that team or as a teammate, you can be like, listen, I appreciate your, you know, your, or if you, I guess that might be a lie, but like, I appreciate you trying, you know, you giving me this advice, even if you don't appreciate the advice itself. Or maybe you appreciate the advice itself, but not the person. So it could be like, I appreciate the advice. Um, but, uh, and that's especially church, okay, which most of it is volunteer. But I got to be transparent with you. I see you doing the same exact thing, and that, but you're giving me advice. I would like for you to see you follow your own advice.
Yeah. Well,
you know, so from the other end, you need to be transparent with your leader.
Yeah.
You know,
that's what I'm saying. Like that's the instance, the specific instance that I'm addressing because I have seen that. Like at work, for example, somebody in a actually professional environment at work, because not all churches are professional, but you know, the head person would come and they're like, hey, you need to work on this because you're not. Let's say I'm doing something wrong in some way. Like you need to work on this. Literally everything they said, I don't take it because they're messing up in that area. I have not seen them do anything differently or correctly. And because of that, also a lot of times they wouldn't even convince me that what I'm doing is wrong. So I continue in my own way because they're not doing anything differently. They haven't brought up any examples that actually convinced me or advice. So I'm not going to take anything they say seriously. So in that case, I think it would be wise for them to bring somebody else in because what they have to say is null and void because their life.
Do they know?
You know, well,
that you if it's if you tell them like, hey, what you're saying is diddly squat to me.
Yes, be transparent, of course.
There has to be the transparency.
Yes, I
and
agree.
Then if that's the case, be like, and let's say back to the leader, you as a leader, your teammate says, hey, I don't take what you say seriously because you're dealing with the same thing.
Yeah.
Be like, okay, would it help if we brought in a person that is an authority in this subject or an expert?
Yeah.
Again, so we can grow together. Let's keep each other
See, that's what I was
accountable.
saying. That sometimes I feel like it's warranted because we're people.
But that's assuming that they're transparent.
Yeah. And why was to rewind back a little bit, my very first reason why I brought this up, because sometimes we see people are sinning in the same thing, but they're going and trying to rebuke somebody else in it. You know?
Mm.
If you yourself are struggling, you don't see a way out, that's where I feel like you probably should bring somebody else in. Because then it reminds me of the scripture, you have this in your eye, but you're trying to pull it out of their eye.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And a lot of the news right now going around, these pastors, like, you know, that crazy pastor that I was telling you about, that his wife just killed himself.
Mm-hmm.
On their church website, it shows that the worship team, if you're a part of the worship team, you cannot be sleeping around, you can't be drinking, you can't blah, 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 blah. All the things the pastor was doing. But yet he made the list of what you're not supposed to be doing, you know? Mm-hmm. Earlier on in the book, like, blew my mind. It's, whatever you do outside is between you and God. I was like, that's nuts. You know? That's their first entry level to serve in the church. And then after that, there's a little more strict. But as I was looking at it, that pastor has absolutely no right to go and rebuke a member for sleeping around if he's sleeping around. You know, that's insane to me. Like, you need to be disqualified and removed from your position.
In a perfect world, he has no right.
But that's already a very high offense, you know, for a pastor.
Yeah.
Or for in general. But that was my main reason for bringing it up because
I totally get it. It's just it has to, if that's the route you're taking, it has to be approached in a really careful
wisely,
way.
Yeah, and carefully. I agree.
You know, you don't just off the bat, hey, here's some. Guess what? Here's someone. The person's like looking.
Yeah. Well, that's what I
That
was
would
saying.
be
Like, this person's really good about not
that would be as a secondary or follow up or support option.
And I agree. A really well. See, she's saying that's an extreme example. I'm talking about just like I said, like that example. Like everybody knows that when you talk, you cut people off, and then you're going and rebuking one of your people for doing the same thing you're doing.
Then don't approach it that way. Then don't rebuke them. Approach it in a way where you feel like, especially if it's well known. Be like, hey, I saw you. It reminded me of me because I have that issue too. We need to keep each other accountable.
Yeah, I like the accountability part. I think that was key when you said that. I really appreciated that. And I think the transparency part, like, hey, look, you have this issue, I have this issue. We're both struggling in it. We need to figure out how to get past this.
Right, and you as a teammate, transparency is also just as crucial. So.
I think it needs to be transparency from both sides,
Yes.
But I just felt like it needed to be mentioned that some instances may warrant bringing in a third party. That's all.
Further action, yeah.
Yeah, especially if you are dealing with the same problem, you need to tread very wisely and carefully.
I definitely think that should be. Sorry, guys, my teeth are just haywire. I think that definitely should be something in your list of options of how to deal with a problem is having that option of third party support. For sure, I agree with you. The only thing I disagreed with is just like immediately getting using that approach.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting that. I was just saying that basically I was just going back to that defense too, because we know too many people that, like I was saying, they struggle with the same thing, but they're going to call somebody out on it under them, Like when it's that specific circumstance, you have to be really careful, think about your options, because if you have this together and you don't have this issue, freely go and talk to them like, hey, this is a problem, here's why, here's how people deal with it, or how I've learned, how I overcame it. Bring it up. Like that conversation is easy to have usually, because you're not like telling our kids don't curse and you're not cursing. That's a pretty easy conversation to have. But it's a lot more complicated if you yourself struggle with cursing and you gotta bring up to your kids, don't curse. What's the first thing to say? Well, you do it. Or they say, why is it okay for you to do it and not for me? So that was my little like asterisk note I wanted to bring up, is if it's that instance, you gotta approach it wisely, look at your options, expect a type of response like that.
Yeah.
Anyways,
well, that's it, folks. We're over an hour in. I'd like to thank you for joining us, for Victoria and I, or for joining Victoria and I in this conversation.
I'd like to thank you for Victoria
and I. Be sure to share, and share, and subscribe, and share. In not in any particular order.
In any order.
Right. Maybe share with somebody that you think could be blessed. You could you guys could visit, if you're interested in learning more about us, you could visit ksarmory.com. Also, yeah, we still are pursuing the option of doing the digital magazine, Kingdom Digest. So God bless you guys. We will hopefully see you next Wednesday.